Jung's shadow, the dark side of the human psyche. Firstly, the shadow can be thought of as the dark side of the individual's psyche, where all of the ego's repressed traits are hidden away from the light of consciousness. It is formed of those things that your ego deems unacceptable to portray to the outside world, as they threaten our self-concept as a good and virtuous human being. Jung states that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. It is important to recognize that we are powerfully influenced, even controlled by the unconscious forces of the shadow, particularly in the form of strong, instinctual emotional reactions that we have repressed. We will look at the effects of an undeveloped shadow shortly. It is incredibly important that we confront and integrate our shadow so that it no longer controls us, but rather we learn to control it and harness its power for good. The shadow originates in the individual's mind as they grow up, and as society tells them what is and what is not acceptable. From this, we learn what we should repress and hide from others and what we should identify with in order to appear as having a good and virtuous character. As we said earlier, it is made up of those things that our ego, that is the main centre of our personality and our primary self-concept, deems unacceptable to portray to the outside world, as they threaten our self-concept of being a wholly virtuous and selfless and good human being. We do not want to accept that deep down we contain selfish, destructive and immoral impulses and capacities. Our shadow is composed of those things that we repress. Some of these may include aggressive impulses that we have hidden due to us defending our self-image as being a fully kind and giving individual. Some more negative things that constitute the shadow would be immoral urges and also greedy and selfish desires. However, the shadow also contains more positive aspects that have also been repressed due to the normalizing and numbing processes that are evident in society, particularly schools and monotonous 9-to-5 jobs. Some of these positive characteristics include our natural childlike energy, spontaneity and vitality, along with our creative impulses that have been buried away due to the repetitiveness of daily life. So overall, the main factors that contribute to the construction of an individual's shadow are the identification with good, desirable and socially acceptable aspects of character, along with the repression of the opposite aspects, those that are deemed unacceptable and undermine their constructed identity of a wholly good and virtuous human being. The main effect of an undeveloped shadow is something known as psychological projection. Psychological projection is the process of an individual denying evil qualities within themselves while attributing them to others. In other words, we see in other people our own faults. The reason we do this, according to Freud, is that it acts as a defense mechanism used to avoid the anxiety that is provoked when one is forced to face up to their own faults. Psychological projection is usually characterized by a strong and instinctual emotional reaction towards a particular group, person, or action. We'll now look at some examples of psychological projection so that hopefully you'll be able to see how all of these can negatively impact our relationships with others and how important it is to understand psychological projection in order to grow from it and face our own personal insecurities. The first example is when someone always points out that a person is so fat, or that this person is too skinny or too ugly, and so on. If one does this often, then it may reveal that the person has a deep insecurity and aversion to their own body image, and hence they unconsciously feel the need to project this loathing onto others. Another example, typical of people with low self-esteem or social anxiety, is when they claim that it is other people that make them uncomfortable. This again often reveals an insecurity with oneself because they do not want to accept their own anxiety or low self-esteem, and so they project the problem onto the other person. It is their fault rather than themselves, and so it allows them not to face their own problem. Next, the classic example of one claims that he or she is having an affair. Fear that a partner is being untrustworthy can often be a reflection of the way you feel about yourself. Because one deems being attracted to someone other than your partner as unacceptable, you don't want to accept it in yourself. So instead, you project it onto your partner and accuse them of the very thing that you notice in yourself. And finally, the common case when one states that he or she does not like me. The tendency to say this could reveal that it is actually you who does not like the other person, but you don't consciously admit this to yourself. Instead, you play the part of the good guy, whilst the other person is the miserable and pessimistic one. This protects you against feeling bad for disliking someone. And if we look closely, we would likely realise that the only reason we dislike them is because, for example, they are charming and you are not, or they have a successful career and you do not. These few examples show how many insecurities lie deep within us and can subtly reveal themselves through the way we project our own problems onto other people. It is important that we try to recognise as many of these as possible in order to work on our insecurities in order to become the best version of ourselves. Now that we've explored where the shadow comes from and how it presents itself, we can explore Jung's idea of shadow work. Shadow work is important because, as already discussed, if the shadow is denied and repressed, then it can wreak havoc on our lives by controlling our thoughts, emotions, choices and actions. Shadow work is the process of making the unconscious conscious, of allowing us to form a union or bond with the shadow and transmute its power into an opportunity for extreme personal growth. A great analogy is given here. The green grass grows from the dirt and the waterfall flows over the rock. Everything in nature depends on the balance of two halves to create a whole. If the ground is not looked after and the weeds are allowed to grow, then the flowers and the plants will suffer. This comparison shows that the shadow needs to be looked after, otherwise the flowers and plants, our positive and creative potentials, will suffer. The final reason that shadow work is so important is that the shadow harbours extreme potential for personal growth and is the source of potent, creative and powerful capabilities. Finally, before we go into some of the techniques of shadow work, we must understand that during shadow work, we don't necessarily act out the aspects of the shadow, but instead we understand them. We bring them under our control rather than letting it control us. We can transmute aspects of the shadow into an opportunity for great personal growth. The first and most practical technique for practicing shadow work is close observation of our emotional reactions combined with a radical honesty. The purpose is to recognize our own resentment, bitterness, and the ways in which we judge people. But we must be extremely honest with ourselves as we are doing this, as it is extremely important that we do not carry on deceiving ourselves by not truly acknowledging our darker aspects. We need to be honest, even if we don't like what we see. In order to observe our emotions in an effective way, we must learn just to watch the emotion and to not become embroiled in it. Meditation as a complementary technique can help massively with this. Secondly, a process of visualization can help. This process is a lot more difficult, and so not as many people may undertake it because of how challenging and eye-opening it is. For example, it is only after you truly visualize yourself as an Auschwitz guard that you will understand something about your dark side. So often we think that we'd be the hero in any atrocity in the world, but is this not another self-deception? By contemplating our own capacity for evil, we gain a deep insight into how powerful one's shadow can be if not controlled. And by recognizing the extreme power and destructive potential of the shadow, if not properly understood and integrated, we can understand how important it is to do this work. And finally, the last example is ego death. This is an extreme solution, as ego death entails a complete dissolution of the ego, aka it is a form of enlightenment and hence inaccessible to many unless they put in the years of practice. The reason that this is a solution, and perhaps the ultimate solution, is that the ego causes the shadow, so its removal will make the shadow obsolete. To conclude, we must bear in mind that confronting the shadow is extremely difficult, let alone harnessing its power. But we must remember how important both are in becoming our greatest self, and how much potential for growth lies within this work. Thanks very much for watching, and be sure to like if you found the video useful, and be sure to subscribe. See you next time on Feeling Philosophical, and goodbye.